Is this a table for merch?
This is the merch table here.
Okay, well, I can report that there will also be some highly sought-after copies of the Unrealistic Guide to Detroit available for purchase if you want to take the plunge, along with a special added bonus, How to Recuperate an Urban Crisis, the latest pamphlet from the Detroit Unreal Estate Agency, here for you. I'm really happy to be here today, especially because it's an opportunity to engage with Adrian and Chris about capital, currency, informality, affect, space, territory, maybe even architecture, whatever that is. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion that hopefully will ensue. And I'm also happy to be here to talk with you about the Unrealistic Guide to Detroit, which is a book I wrote and came out a few months ago. I have to tell you something, though. You know, it was a lot easier to talk about the Unrealistic Guide before it was a book, when it was unreal, when it was an idea, an ambition, a work in progress, a potentially lost cause, a kind of urgent act of longing, rather than now when it's real. It's a book. It's an artifact. It's something that's impossible for me to improve, impossible for me to repair, impossible for me to abandon, impossible for me to disavow, impossible for me to transform my relationship to at all. This is to say, it would be far, far easier for me to talk to you about any of the unreal versions of this book. The book that I tried to write but didn't, the book that I wished I wrote but couldn't, the book that I would like to write now but probably won't, and any other book that doesn't exist and may never exist and perhaps shouldn't by any right exist at all. But this is exactly the phenomenon, in a certain sense, that the Unrealistic Guide revolves around and attempts to engage, which is to say, the ways in which the dynamics of a putative reality, in the case of this book, it's the reality of real estate, the way that the dynamics of reality limit the possibilities of thought and also limit the possibilities of action. And so what the Unrealistic Guide tries to suggest is that real estate as a concept, as a phenomenon, and as a lived reality, limits or at least structures the way we imagine, the way we occupy, and the way we design urban space. And so that the possibilities of imagining the city and inhabiting the city open up rather than close down when urban space loses market value. Maybe that doesn't sound like a very tendentious claim, but it seems to me that, at least in the predominant narratives, the loss of real estate's market value produces problems that go by the name of vacancy, abandonment, decay, deterioration, disuse, the shrinking city, and this list could go on and on and on. What I'm trying to suggest in the Unrealistic Guide is that along with those problems, there are also possibilities that open up when the market value of real estate declines. And those are the possibilities that I try to register through what I call Unreal Estate. Let me say a few words about Unreal Estate, which is a term I coined in this project. And it's a term that tries to get at the way in which urban space that loses economic value also has the possibility to gain other sorts of values that are impossible to register when urban space functions in the real estate economy. And these kinds of other values, these alternative values that I see as emerging on Unreal Estate are of many different sorts. And the commonality that they have, I would argue, is their condition of possibility in economically valueless or low value property. And this is the kind of property that's available extensively in Detroit. In Detroit, those who have taken advantage of what I call Unreal Estate are numerous. They include activists, artists, architects, anarchists, community groups, block clubs, outsider collectors and curators, urban explorers, urban gardeners, urban farmers, scavengers, and many, many others. All of them are involved in a kind of provisional, precarious, often very furtive urbanism that's availing itself of easily available urban space. And what the ambition of the Unrealistic Guide is, on some level anyway, is to document that kind of precarious urbanism, and in so doing, document the way that devalued urban space in Detroit is being reappropriated and reoccupied. Some of that reappropriation and reoccupation is very small scale and ephemeral. Some of it is larger scale and longer term. Some, as I've said, is authored by neighborhood or community groups that have deep knowledge and deep commitment of the spaces in which they live. Some is authored by very naive visiting artists and architects. Some of this urbanism seeks a wide audience. Others seek to be hidden. Some of it is legal. Others of it is illegal. Some of it is politically acute. Others, it has to say, is politically quite vague. All of this urbanism, however, has emerged in a city where urban space is far more available for reappropriation, reoccupation, re-inhabitation, I would argue anyway, than in cities with intact and functional real estate markets. So what the Unrealistic Guide is an attempt to document the myriad ways in which urban space is being informally used in Detroit. I don't advance this informal, precarious urbanism as a solution to any of the very real problems that Detroit faces. Rather, I'm simply trying to document a condition that I would argue is often neglected or overlooked, especially in narratives about the emptiness or the vacancy or the abandonment of Detroit. I think if one looks very closely at Detroit or cities like it, one sees that spaces that might look to be empty or might look to be abandoned, especially from a distance, are actually occupied and used, although in subtle, provisional, or difficult to disclose ways. Now, to advocates of top-down planning, urban right-sizing, urban downsizing, this sort of precarious urban culture might not have very much significance at all. It might not mean much of anything. But I think to those of us who are looking for alternatives to top-down planning, this kind of urbanism might present other ways of surviving or even transforming the city, ways that rely on self-organization rather than on institutions, that they're more of experimental projections rather than applications of knowledge that we already possess, and that exist more as expenditures in the present moment rather than investments in a future that may or indeed may not ever arrive. The Unrealistic Guide brings together projects and activities that are usually seen, if they're seen at all, in isolation from one another. And it brings these projects and activities together under new categories that, perhaps as you can see here, have enigmatic names that I hope discourage easy appropriation and that I hope encourage further scrutiny. Ruin harvest, feral research, municipal therapy, furtive inhabitation, and so on. The point here is to at least try to disable the use of these projects as answers to questions that we already have, and at the same time to provoke new questions about an urban condition that I think is usually ignored, or if it is noticed, it's noticed in only a kind of intermittent or distracted way. So what I'd like to do now is very quickly review a few sections of the book to give you perhaps a more precise sense of the kinds of conditions that the book tries to document. In in a study of what I call unprofessional practices, for example, I look at a phenomenon called ruin harvesting. Ruins are usually regarded as either problems to solve, and that this would be through demolition or reconstruction, or else as visually entrancing spectacles. And this is what in Detroit we often call the objects of ruin porn. But ruins can also be something else. They can also be simply material resources that can be used to accommodate new use values. And this is what happens in what I call ruin harvesting, which is a process by means of which ruins are simply used to fabricate new spaces, new images, or new practices. One example is a project called Detroit Demolition Disneyland. And this is a project that emerged in the winter of 2005 when the city of Detroit was preparing to host the Super Bowl a few months later by among other things, demolishing abandoned houses, which they thought were kinds of presenting a bad image or the wrong image of the city. So precisely when the municipality was destroying abandoned houses, an anonymous group of artists, as you see here, were painting these houses bright orange. And this anonymous group sent a communique to an online platform where they claimed authorship of this project and named it the Detroit Demolition Disneyland. And in this communique, the group claimed that by painting these houses bright orange, it's actually a color called Tiggerific orange, which you can buy at Home Depot. By painting houses bright orange, it invited Detroit's citizens to enhance their awareness of the city. But what exactly the city citizens should be aware of was left unnamed. Was it the fact that there are abandoned houses in Detroit? Was it the fact that the city was attempting to repress this abandonment by demolishing its most conspicuous examples? Did it have to do with the agency of art or architecture to critique that repression? Or did it have to do with the limits of art, which is able to offer a critique, perhaps, without proposing any kind of real alternatives? The project leaves these kinds of questions open. But to me, anyway, in leaving those kinds of questions open, the project occupies Unreal Estate without endowing it with any sort of more stable, positive value that would be recognizable in a real estate market. A different kind of ruin harvesting was accomplished in a project called Firebreak, which was a project that appropriated a series of burned out single-family houses in Detroit neighborhoods for various sorts of architectural performances, celebrations, and provocations. And this was a project that was done not in a clandestine way as the previous project, but very openly as groups from neighborhoods or communities came to the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, which is at the Architecture School at the University of Detroit, and worked together to transform burned out houses into some sort of proto-public space or indeed public space. So what you're looking at here is one example, which is a house that was burned out, which is in the process of being covered with a white surface so that it can function as a screen for the projection of films, which were done over the course of a series of summer evenings. This is another example where the ruins of a burned out house was covered with transparent plastic. And here is another example where a house is in the process of being covered with a lattice, which was used as a kind of backdrop for bows, little bows of hay to be placed. And as you can see here, these projects are not only produce objects, but they also produce new sorts of communities that come together to enact those projects. Amidst a study of what I call unsanctioned collectives, I look at a phenomenon that I call do-it-yourself then together. Now, you all know what do-it-yourself culture is. To do something yourself rather than to rely on others to do it is to claim responsibility for creating something that you need and want. And perhaps it's also to even open up the possibility of needing or wanting something new, something different. So the do-it-yourselfer, to some degree, is a passive consumer transformed into an active producer. But both this consumer, this passive consumer and active producer, are each solitary. Each works alone. And so each fits very neatly into the free market's society of disaggregated individuals. In the city of Unrealistic, to do things collectively becomes desirable. And so do-it-yourself culture becomes, in many ways, collectivized. It's a culture that's transformed from an assemblage of individuals to a community that's oriented around perhaps shared interests among many different kinds of things. These are often very intimate communities. To do something yourself and then together is to rely upon relations of trust, affection, familiarity, or solidarity. And these are the kinds of relations, I argue, that have a kind of special condition of possibility in the city of Unrealistic, where knowledge and skill and imagination can be exchanged in lieu of money. So one example of this, of what I call do-it-yourself then together culture, is an artist collective called the Yes Farm, in which, and you're looking at a building which the Yes Farm squatted on the east side of Detroit here. This is a collective in which art encompasses almost an infinite range of activities, from the cultivation of community gardens, through the staging of performances with neighborhood children, to the curation of music and dance concerts and open submission art exhibitions. And you're looking here at a side of the building where there's a notice board that presents what's going on at the Yes Farm. And what this indicates is how actually the audience of the Yes Farm is extremely small scale. It's essentially the block on which this building sits. It's essentially the Yes Farm exists to produce a culture on and for a single city block on the east side of Detroit. And what's also very specific about the Yes Farm is the way it poses the community on this block, not as something that's flawed, inadequate, necessary to rebuild or repair, as many, let's call them socially based art practices in Detroit and elsewhere try to do. This is not a project that's invoking some kind of superior community yet to come. Rather, it's a project that's situated in an existing community and a project that tries to find opportunities and possibilities to work within that community on its own terms. So it's based then on a kind of radical acceptance of existing conditions and a radical suspension of the very strong temptation that artists and architects often have to improve quote unquote, the life of other people, whether it's by art, architecture, or any other means. And these are some images from the Yes Farm showing all kinds of different things that happen there. Similarly, a collective called the UFO Factory also, I think, indicates the way that Unrealistic can support cultural activities that have no commercial salience at all. And also, this project displays, I think, the specific capacity of Unrealistic to blur the boundary between artist, performer, audience, and thereby form new communities of interest. The UFO Factory is based on the production and consumption, essentially, of two things. One of them is noise music, and the other one is experimental art. Both of those things have extremely small audiences. And what happens at the UFO Factory is that the production and consumption of both noise music and experimental art is in a way supported and in a way done so that the producers of this art and music and the audience of it meet, mingle, and encounter each other in a myriad of different sorts of ways. And you're looking at some scenes of performances here, and I guess you could call it the afterlife of a performance in the backyard, and some posters of concerts that were held there. The last section of the book, which is dedicated to what I call unsolicited constructions, deals in part with something that I call patrimony of the unlost. This is patrimony that consists of things that are disowned or abandoned by some people and then repossessed and reclaimed by other people, by strangers, by people who invent a kind of new patrimony for themselves, a new sort of a material inheritance for themselves out of objects that are disinherited and devalued by other people. And so these people who claim this patrimony become, in a sense, self-appointed curators or caretakers, or in a sense, maybe even outsider artists and architects, archiving, arranging the kind of very particular material culture that emerges in a city of unreal estate. One example of that is a project called Hamtramck Disneyland, which was undertaken by a Ukrainian immigrant and retired General Motors auto worker, who you can see here. So this is a gentleman who worked for decades on a very kind of Fordist-oriented assembly line, doing a kind of routinized sort of labor over and over and over again. And what he's done in his retirement is do the kind of diametrically opposite sort of labor to create this kind of ad hoc, unplanned, accretive assemblage of more or less the detritus of middle-class American popular culture: bicycle wheels, toys, dolls, pots of artificial flowers, model airplanes, Christmas lights, Elvis paintings, wooden soldiers, flags, signs, and so forth, and so on. And as in many other sorts of unreal estate work, the intentions of this project, the meanings of this project, even the very identity of this project is left undefined, unscripted, and left thereby to its audience to decipher. Another example of what I call patrimony of the unlost is perhaps the most well-known art project in Detroit, the Heidelberg Project, where an artist appropriated a series of abandoned houses and vacant lots on a kind of ever-enlarging area on the east side of Detroit where he grew up, as sites for the display of both made objects and found objects. These are things like stuffed animals, vacuum cleaners, television sets, shoes, hubcaps, telephones, other items of domestic urban life. According to the artist, the agenda of this project was to defamiliarize what was conventionally perceived to be mere garbage. So here, waste objects are very carefully curated, arrayed on empty lots, or hung from the walls of abandoned houses or trees, decorated often with polka dots. Polka dots which also adorn houses, cars, trees, and street surfaces on and around the site. What and where is the community that this project represents? Who can legitimately speak on behalf of this community? Who is able to listen to this community? What's the relationship of the artist to that community? How can art like this benefit that community? This is a project that raises questions like this without providing simple answers in response, and this is the kind of provocation that I think is particularly suited to unreal estate, and I think may indeed comprise one of this project's most profound social effects. I want to end by talking about a few terms. The kind of work that I've just been showing you is often fit under the category of the informal, as in the guise of, say, informal urbanism. This is a problematic category, though, because the informal exists only in relationship to the formal. It's an alternative to the formal. Informality is a term that's predicated on the normality of the formal. Informality, though, is precarity. Precarity is a category that addresses the informal from the inside, as a practice that's undertaken not as a mere alternative to something else, but as a kind of mode of survival, a necessity, a way of negotiating challenges that simply can't be avoided. But precarity is itself reproletarianization. That is to say, it emerges out of a specific sort of process, a process that's in this historical moment occurring globally, where large numbers of formerly middle-class people are being forced into either the working class or impoverishment in the course of surviving the ruins of the welfare state. Now, reproletarianization, on one level, names a process that yields social suffering and adversity and challenge, but it also names a process that creates the possibility for new forms of identity and solidarity, which is to say, reproletarianization is the possibility of another world. And it's this world that I think may be imagined or anticipated or perhaps even advanced in the gaps and fissures of Unrealistic. So let me end here, and perhaps now we can discuss issues of common concern.